Hey everybody, today we are making 3 easy vegan meals such as garlic bread pizza, some tasty tostadas, and lastly we'll be making some spicy chili garlic noodles. These are perfect for a weeknight or any night really. All of them come together in about 30 minutes. They are super customizable and they should leave you with some good leftovers too. So let's get started with the garlic bread pizza. For the bread, you can use any French loaf such as these. Just make sure you don't use a baguette as you want something softer. I decided to do something different and try out this sourdough loaf, which usually sourdough can be a bit tougher, but this loaf is pretty soft as you can see here. And to make the garlic bread, we'll need some softened vegan butter. I've got about 100 grams here. And then we'll chop up about 4 or 5 cloves of garlic, and then we'll add that in. Next, we'll chop up about 2 tablespoons of Italian parsley and add those to the mix. Stir that up, and then this is optional, but I'm going to add in some of this vegan parmesan. You could also totally just use some nutritional yeast if you want. Mix that up, and now that is our garlic butter, and depending on the size of your bread, you will probably have some left over, but you won't be mad as this stuff is pretty amazing on its own. Like on bread, not just eating it with a spoon, but do what you want. And now for the pizza sauce, you can use some jarred stuff, but I highly recommend taking 10 minutes to put this simple sauce together. Not only is it way better, but you'll have plenty of leftover sauce for some pasta or a meatball sub or really just about anything that you'd use a red sauce on. So let's chop up about 4 or 5 more cloves of garlic and then heat up 2 tablespoons of olive oil in a pan over medium heat. And then we're going to add in our garlic, followed by 1 tablespoon of this Italian seasoning. You could totally just use some dried oregano and basil and whatnot. Toast that just for 30 seconds, careful not to burn the garlic, and then we'll add in a 28-ounce can of crushed tomatoes and stir that around. And then next, for a little bit of heat, we're going to add in 1 heaping teaspoon of these Calabrian chilies. I hope I'm saying that right. But you could also just use some red pepper flakes to taste as well. Next, let's do a teaspoon of onion powder, and then optionally but recommended is 1 tablespoon of some mushroom seasoning and nutritional yeast for some added umami. And then to balance out the tomatoes, we'll add 1 tablespoon of sugar as well. And then we're going to do some salt to taste, and now you have a really delicious and versatile sauce that you can use on our pizza, but like I said, anything else your heart desires too. All right, now that our sauce is done, let's put our pizza together. We're gonna get our bread and try to cut it in half as best as we can. And then I saw Jay Kenji Alt suggest squishing the bread so it doesn't curl up. And I'm not sure if I did it right, but it seemed to turn out pretty good. And then next we're gonna spread on plenty of our garlic butter and make sure we get as close to total coverage as possible. And then after that, we're gonna toast it in a 425-degree oven for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then we're going to take that out, and now let's spread a layer of our sauce on there. And you don't want to go too heavy, which I might have, although these turned out great, so maybe I didn't. Who knows? But for the cheese, use your favorite vegan mozzarella. Today I'm using this stuff by Follow Your Heart, which I do like quite a bit. We're going to spread a nice layer of that cheese around. And then whatever toppings you like, I'm just doing some vegan pepperoni. This is the Yeast brand. And next time I'd like to do like a supreme with, peppers, sausage, olives, that sort of thing. In any case, now we just got to pop that back in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes or until the cheese is melted, and then we're going to take it out. And now the hardest part, letting it rest for 10 minutes so you don't burn your mouth, which I've done more times than I can count. Now, in the name of science, I also made some pizza using the bigger loaf of French bread, so that's what I'm using here. And I really can't say that either French or sourdough works great, just make sure they are soft and squishy. But once it's cooled off, I like to cut mine into strips like so, because it makes it a lot easier to dip it in some ranch like so. And this was so freaking amazing, better than anything I've gotten from Stouffer's back in the day. That garlic butter and homemade sauce really elevate this beyond anything you might get at the store. And while it's a bit more work than a frozen pizza, I'd say the rewards are well worth it. And like I said, you have a ton of extra sauce left over for other dishes. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video using this sauce in a variety of ways. That could be super fun too. All right, next let's do some tostadas, and these are super easy and fun. For the tostada itself, you can use something like this store-bought one, or you can make your own with very little effort, and again, you'll be rewarded with something much better. Now, most of the time you'll see corn tortillas for this, but I wanted to try some flour too. And honestly, I think I liked the corn slightly better, but the flour are pretty good as well. So experiment and see which one you like. Now, to cook them, there's two options that I tried out. The first was simply frying them in a bit of oil until they were crispy. This only takes a few minutes, and once they're done to your liking, you're gonna let them rest on a wire rack and give them a little salt, and that's basically it. The other option was baking them. So I lined them on a baking sheet, sprayed them with some cooking oil, hit them with a little bit of salt, and then baked them at 400 degrees for about 5 minutes, flipped them, and then baked until crispy about another 5 minutes or so. And taste-wise and texture-wise, I did prefer the fried, but the baked was easier to make and less messy. And while they're baking in the oven, you can be prepping other stuff as they cook. So if time is a factor, the oven wins. But honestly, both options are pretty good in my book. Speaking of prep, I'm also going to make some pico de gallo from scratch. And while again, you can totally get store-bought, the homemade is just going to be way, way better. And you can totally do this ahead of time and keep it at the ready to make things go even faster. But for our homemade pico, let's dice up half of an onion, and we won't be using all of this, but reserving some for our vegan beef later. But also, I like having some pre-diced onion in the fridge at all times. It's just another little trick, so you always have onion at the ready. But anyways, after that, let's dice up 2 to 3 Roma tomatoes, and here I am awkwardly dicing a tomato like so. This was something I saw recently, and I'm gonna master it one day, I swear. And don't worry, I know it looks like I'm gonna cut myself, but I didn't. So just cut it into strips, and then we're gonna dice it like so. And after that, let's dice up a jalapeno, and then we're gonna chop up a little cilantro. And really, there isn't much of a specific recipe here. Just add as much of each ingredient as you'd like. Speaking of which, let's get our tomatoes, and we'll add some of our cilantro, followed by some jalapeno, a bit of our onion, and then some lime juice, of course. We're gonna stir that around, taste it, and realize it could use some freshly chopped garlic. So we're going to add that in along with a bit of salt, and then stir that around and give it a taste and realize it's totally perfect. And now here we go. That's the homemade versus the store-bought pico de gallo. I gave the store-bought a taste test, and honestly, it was so awful. It mostly tasted kind of like bland water. I couldn't even swallow it. I had to pay the trash can a visit. So yeah, like I said, homemade is way, way, way better in this case. Now for the beans, again, you can use a can of refried beans, but this is my preferred method. I'm going to get a can of whole pinto beans and throw them in a pan with their bean juice. Don't discard that stuff. It'll come in handy. Then mash those beans to your desired consistency. And next, we just got to season them. So let's do some smoked paprika, some cumin, a few shakes of garlic powder, as well as onion powder. And then for some heat, a little chipotle powder. We're going to do some salt to taste, and then some black pepper, a squeeze of lime, of course, and just keep seasoning it until it tastes good. And now you are all done with your beans. And now we can go on to the beef. And you can use whatever vegan ground beef you like. You could even use something like this soy rizo or lentils or mushrooms, or just skip it all together. And remember, those leftover onions and jalapenos from our pico de gallo, well, we're going to add them to the pan over some medium heat. We're going to saute them for a few minutes until they're translucent. Maybe add a little salt and pepper, and then we're going to drop in 12 ounces of plant-based beef. We're going to crumble that up and cook it until it's browned and heated through. And because I was getting hungry, I just found this packet of Taco Bell seasoning that I had and used that. See, I am not above some shortcuts. So we'll add that, and then also some more lime juice, and then a little bit of water to help the seasonings mingle. And then once that's tasting good to you, that is it for the beef. So let's shred up some iceberg lettuce as you do, and then it's almost time to assemble. I just want to show you one more thing. This is probably my favorite sauce in this situation. All you need to do is get some vegan mayo, some diced chipotles in adobo, and some lime juice. We're going to put that in a blender and blend it until smooth, and now you have a delicious lazy person's chipotle crema. All right, now we can assemble. So get one of your tostada shells, give it a good smearing of refried beans, which, by the way, do the beans first, as they'll keep the shell from crumbling into a million pieces on your first bite. And then next is our vegan beef, followed by some optional but recommended freshly grated vegan cheddar cheese. I'm using a Daya block. So top that with some of our lettuce, and then the chipotle crema, and lastly our homemade pico de gallo. And now, my friends, this was so freaking amazing. I'm actually thinking I might need to make this again as I'm here doing the voiceover. It's just so simple and satisfying, and like I said, plenty of leftovers to make tacos or burritos or whatever you want. Now, last but certainly not least is some chili garlic noodles, and these are super simple and one of my favorite new meals to make. And we're going to start by prepping our veggies. I'm just going to slice up a red bell pepper into some slices, and then I'll chop up some bok choy, but feel free to use whatever veggies you like. Next, I'm going to chop up about 8 cloves of garlic, which is pretty much an entire head, but use as much or as little as you want. After that, we're going to put together our sauce, which will be 4 to 5 tablespoons of soy sauce or tamari. And then I'm going to use 1 tablespoon of black vinegar, but you could also just use some rice vinegar, though I might just use half a tablespoon of that. And then 1 tablespoon of hoisin sauce, 2 tablespoons of this chili garlic sauce, which is very similar to sambal. And then next is 1 teaspoon of Shaoxing cooking wine, but you could also just use some white wine if you don't have this stuff. And then next is 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, about a 1/3 cup of water, and then 2 teaspoons of cornstarch. And it's also worth noting that you can take a shortcut and just use something like this stir-fry sauce if you want something faster, though as usual, I do prefer the homemade. And now that we've got everything prepped, let's go ahead and get our noodles started. I'm using these, but you could honestly use whatever noodle you would like. Even spaghetti would be totally fine. So I'll get a pot of water going, and in the meantime, we can start cooking everything else. So let's get a large skillet or wok over medium heat, and then it's time to make some burgers. And now I'm just kidding. I couldn't find the brick of impossible, so I had to use the patties. But you're going to want to get about 8 ounces of plant-based meat, or again, use mushrooms, lentils, or even crumbled tofu would work. We'll go ahead and break that up and brown it. And now this is optional, but recommended. I'm going to throw in about half a teaspoon of some crushed up Szechuan peppercorns. And then once the meat is browned, we'll go ahead and remove it from the pan and reserve it in a bowl for later. And at this point, my water was boiling, so I added in my noodles, and as per usual, I added way too many because I wanted to make sure I had enough for the photos, but it turned out fine, so who cares? Now we just need to cook our veggies. I'm going to pan fry the bell peppers in a bit of oil for a few minutes until they start to soften and get a little bit of color on them. And then I'm going to throw in the bok choy and stir that around. And now if you're like me and your noodles are cooked through before you finish everything else, you can drain them and then run them under cool water to stop them from cooking, and then just reserve them until we need them. And then back at the veggies, I'll clear the middle of the pan and make a little mosh pit, and then we're going to throw in some optional dried chilies, followed by our garlic. And then we're going to stir that around and cook it just for a minute. We don't want to burn the garlic. And then we're going to add in our vegan beef back in there, as well as our stir-fry sauce, which you should shake or whisk up if the cornstarch has settled to the bottom. So add that in and then stir that around. And then add in your noodles and stir those around and let everybody mosh and get to know one another. And now you have a really delicious, super tasty chili garlic noodle dish. And to make it even tastier, add 1 to 2 tablespoons of this chili crisp oil. For some reason, I wasn't filming when I added it, but if you have it, definitely use it. But regardless, this is so dang good. For me, this was the perfect level of spice and garlic, and it really was like takeout, but way better. And like I said, this will leave you with plenty of leftovers if you're only cooking for 1 or 2 people, and should easily feed 4 people. And there we go, 3 simple vegan meals. I really did enjoy all of these. They were super satisfying and easy to make, so I really do think y'all should make them. And let me know in the comments if you like this video and what other kinds of meals you'd like to see in the future. And if you want to spend a little more time on something like this, check out my beef and broccoli video right here. That one is super good too. If you do make them, let me know how it goes, and I'll see you all next time.